Thank you for coming to our session. Really appreciate it. Today's session is going to be Ingredients to a Successful Desktop Virtualization Bake-off Part 2. So just curious, how many of you guys were actually in our session last year? A couple people. All right, great. All right. So let me just pop this over here. Is that working? That's not working. Okay.
So I'm Jarian Gibson. I'm a virtualization practice manager at Choice Solutions. You can follow me at Jarian Gibson on Twitter. My blog is jariangibson.com, and I've also been recently awarded as a Citrix Technology Professional. So, one of the newbies.
So I'm Shane Kleinert. I'm a solutions architect for an IT consulting company, JDL Technologies, down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane Kleinert. That's with a T. And my blog, I contribute to ITVCE, so it's shane.itvce.com. Here's some community initiatives that we assist with. So join.citrix IRC, it's a great initiative. It's basically community-driven real-time support for Citrix. So community admins and experts from all over the world are in that channel there. So also ITVCE is a great initiative. It's cloud and desktop and server virtualization enthusiast blog on there as well. And Tech Bake-off, which we're going to talk to you guys about.
So just some housekeeping items. Tweet about this session, hashtag BriForum, hashtag Tech Bake-off. During our presentation here, we encourage audience participation, so feel free to give us feedback, open discussion, ask questions, and then at the end we'll have an open Q&A as well.
So what is Tech Bake-off? So Tech Bake-off is basically a community-driven initiative that we put together that's basically out there to educate individuals and businesses on how to conduct vendor-agnostic technology bake-offs. Okay? So the focus is a little bit different than traditional bake-off. So when you hear the term bake-off, you think it's pushing one technology against the other. Which feature is better than which, right? And that's not really what we believe in. We feel that it's better to focus on what solution makes the most sense for the business need. So finding out what the business really needs and then assigning solutions based on that. So we're going to talk through that framework and how that works. So with some of the discussion points and test cases. And it's also about community cookbook. So what we've done, and we're going to talk to you about, we put together a desktop virtualization cookbook. And this cookbook basically goes through how to conduct a bake-off from start to finish, the pre-bake-off phase, the bake-off, and the post-bake-off.
We also have some tools we use also to help track everything, follow the framework, and we'll go through some of the tools we use, along with tomorrow we have another session where we're actually doing desktop virtualization monitoring tools. We're baking those off as well. So this was the first project, and we have another one in our session tomorrow we'll talk about.
Okay, so part one. So what do we do in part one? There was a couple of people in our session last year. So for those of you that weren't in here, just a quick recap. We basically gave an introduction to the Tech Bake-off framework. What do we set out to do, what the initiative was about. And we talked about a detailed bake-off outline. We went through the pre-bake-off, all the different pieces, and we're going to do a high-level overview in a minute. So for the guys that weren't there last year, the actual bake-off and the post-bake-off. And then we put a survey out there, and we asked, we kind of explained what Tech Bake-off was, and we asked everyone in the audience, just go ahead and fill out the survey, give us an idea if you think this is a good initiative, and we got pretty positive feedback. So we decided to move forward with a cookbook, which we're going to actually be releasing an appetizer of that cookbook. It's a 14-page appetizer. The full release right now is around 100 pages just for the pre-bake-off section. So we're starting out with an appetizer that's 14 pages. That's highlights, basically, through the entire cookbook that we're going to talk to you guys about as well. So why part two? We wanted to come back this year with a more structured framework around what Bake-Off Initiative is all about. And we were releasing a cookbook appetizer that we just spoke about. We also decided to put together a Podio workspace for actually conducting your bake-off. How many of you are actually familiar with what Podio is?
Couple hands out there, good.
All right, a couple people. So basically at a high level, we'll talk more about it, but Podio is basically a social collaboration platform that allows you to collaborate with your work folks. So think of like Facebook, Twitter, SharePoint kind of rolled into one with a little bit of their secret sauce for building your own workflows for applications. And we're going to walk through what this Podio workspace is. But if you think about it, a typical bake-off, what you would do in those scenarios, people have Excel sheets that they do assessments on or scripts, and then emails go back and forth, whiteboards, stuff like that. This is going to capture everything and put it in a single spot. So we're going to walk through that Podio workspace as well. And the other reason is organizations are buying technology for the wrong reasons. So we wanted to kind of walk through that, what we're seeing out there in the field, some of our experiences, and talk about how we can better make decisions when we're talking about purchasing technology, not just buying technology because it's cool.
Yeah, because someone goes to a conference, sees the hot new thing, they come back, no business use case,
CIO magazine,
no initiative,
right?
they just want it, and there's no structure around it. So.
And then at the end, we're going to do an open format. So we want to understand what your guys' experience is with bake-offs and kind of have an open discussion and share knowledge in that respect. So a couple questions for you guys. How many, well, we already asked this question. We got about 5 people that were in our session last year. And how many of you out there have actually conducted a bake-off before?
So
okay, it's about 4 people.
For those of you that conducted a bake-off, did you have any kind of framework? How did you judge which worked, which didn't work? How did you track the whole process? Anybody want to volunteer?
It's exactly what you said, spreadsheets, whiteboards, documents, but we made up the criteria and then fulfilled it. It wasn't something to follow.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Predefined criteria is probably the most important. Have the customer define what their objectives are, what the success criteria is before you even start deploying components. Because if you start showing them components, they'll start to create criteria around what they like and what they don't like.
Right. Yep, that's 100% true.
And also evolving it as you going along, because users tend to pick up things, learn things that customer learns as they go along, so the criteria shifts.
Exactly.
All right, great. And then one more question, you guys. We want you to think about throughout the course of this session, and then we're going to ask you guys the same question again and get your feedback. So, do you think it's possible to actually conduct a vendor-agnostic bake-off? Just think about that. Let it marinate a little bit, and then we'll ask that again at the end of the session. All right. So. Bake-off overview. Here's an overview of the framework. Again, it's pre-bake-off, bake-off, and post-bake-off. And before we dive into the framework, I want to talk for a second about the meat of the bake-off. Because at the end of the day, the pre-bake-off is really looking in and setting up kind of the outline for the bake-off. But the bake-off is where you actually put your hands on the solution, right? So the bake-off is typically broken out, and we have different topics. Whether it's delegation of administration, security, compliance, architectural discussions, high availability, all those discussions are kind of broken out into 2 sections. They're discussion points, which are discussions that are basically happening between you and your internal staff, as well as vendors or integrators about these technology solutions to help you better determine what solution makes the most sense for your needs. This happens in the pre-bake-off, so certain discussions might come up that will make you realize that, hey, this solution is definitely not going to be a fit before you go down the road of choosing solutions. And test cases, which are actually testing the solution. For instance, image management update. Okay, well, what does that look like, and what does that workflow look like in VMware? What does it look like in Quest? What does it look like, or Dell vWorkspace? What does it look like in Citrix? So walking through those test cases is important, and then rating those test cases, which we're going to get into, because once you have the rating, you then look at that from a debrief standpoint, so you know which solution to pick. So here's our framework. We got our master chef chief bake-off guy up there. Okay, so he's gonna help us run through the engine. We didn't name him yet, but I don't know, like Stewie maybe. Looks like a Stewie. So basically, just a quick overview here of what we got going on. So P, if there's a P on the diagram, that basically means it's a Podio application, right? So we built a Podio app around this objective for the bake-off outline. Okay. Orange means it's a management level discussion, C-level or management. And green means it's your whole team. Your bake-off team is defining these objectives as part of the bake-off. And blue is a section. So first section here basically is determine your business needs. Much like Dane just stated, if you don't have these things stated up front, you're going to end up picking technology for the wrong reason. So ask the questions. And we walk through some of those discovery questions when we look at the Podio, when we do a demo of the Podio workspace. But make sure that the organization understands their business needs, why they're doing the technology, what use cases are really defined, right? You want to jump in there?
Yeah, then determine your bake-off budget. So you want to know what kind of money you have to aside for the bake-off. Do you need to lend on vendors for hardware to borrow? So forth. You want to make sure you have that information and how much you have to do that, and lean on vendors if you can.
Yep, and determining a bake-off lead, that's critical, right? Because if you don't determine a lead, think about just project management in general. They have a project manager because they're the ones that take ownership of the project. If you don't have a lead of the bake-off to take ownership, then what's going to happen is you're going to go ahead and assign another hat to your one of your IT system administrators, and he's going to get pulled away and fighting fires, and you're never going to get the bake-off done. You need someone to take ownership of the bake-off.
Yeah, the best experience I've seen with that is have a dedicated project lead for it. Don't have the engineer involved in the bake-off doing it, because they get pulled away. They get distracted and things get out of whack then. So, yeah,
sure.
About the importance of that. The other thing is you're also managing multi-vendors.
Yep.
So one of our big bake-offs, the big one we did, actually we were ostensibly hired to sit between the vendors and the customers.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of interesting, like, because you have to have that lead, but
Yep.
also you've got people with agendas.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Yep, and the
That's a good
lead,
point.
yep, and the lead has the best interest in mind as well is important, you know, that they know obviously the organization's needs. So the lead could be someone that's internal to the organization. It could be a consultant, a VAR, an integrator, but you want it to be someone that has the best interest of the customer in mind. Because if they, like you said, if they have an agenda and they work for a specific vendor, they might try to lean it a certain way, and then it's not really that vendor agnostic framework.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you want to do what's right for the customer, for the company, not for vendor A or vendor B. So that's the reason why you want to have that third party outside of the bake-off.
Yep, and then, so didn't mention that before, but there's a P next to determining business needs, so we'll walk through the Podio app for that. There's one next to determining the lead for the bake-off, and then the lead is actually going to determine the team. So that lead that is conducting the bake-off is going to determine who the members of the team are, and those members of the team are people that are internal to the organization. Some people are going to be the different vendors and VARs and those contacts, and we're going to talk more about team, but it's important when you're doing these bake-offs and going forward into the actual implementations that you have synergy across all your teams, because at the end of the day, you know, desktop virtualization touches many different layers. So you need to make sure your storage administrators, your security administrators, your network administrators are all working together.
Yeah, in our bake-off examples we talk about later, I actually had a customer who brought everyone from every department in IT in the room before we even talked about products. They just wanted to talk about desktop virtualization in general, you know, what's involved. You know, we had questions from security, application packaging, server admins, desktop admins. So, you know, that's the kind of level you want to see of commitment from the team members.
Yep, slicing through the vendor FUD, Ninja Slice, right? So basically what that is, Podio app, that's in order, how do you slice through the vendor FUD? We talk about this a lot in detail in the cookbook, but basically there's a couple things you can do. First thing is educate yourself, you know, get out there, understand what the different technology solutions are, start at a higher level. You know, there's resources out there that are agnostic, like the VDI Smackdown by the PQR guys. Great document, it's a huge white paper, it actually goes feature by feature, talks a little bit about business needs ahead of time, and breaks down the different features of the different solutions kind of agnostically so you can see what's out there. Brian Madden's book that he has, the VDI Reality, the new one that's out, and the one that last year as well, is a great overview of what the different concepts of desktop virtualization is. There's a lot of other resources out there, but basically this section's a Podio app that's called a library. And all those resources go into the library in Podio, along with things such as, you know, your administrator guides, your best practices guides, all those things are going to go in there. And one more thing about slicing through vendor FUD is really reference calls. That's something that you want to take an account, and we have a Podio for that as well, and that's really, you know, the customers setting up reference calls with the vendors. How do you track all that? And we're going to walk through that in Podio, because if you don't track that, you know, let's say John Smith is doing his reference call and he's out sick the next day and he's not in the bake-off meeting. Where's all the information from his reference call? Well, it's nowhere. It's in his laptop and Notepad somewhere, or Evernote in the cloud, right? So in this case, it'd be in Podio in a section that can be tracked and people can comment on it. Next piece is determine success criteria, which is critical. If you're going to go ahead and do a bake-off and you don't have success criteria, you don't know why the bake-off is good, what's going to, you know, make it a success or not. And don't just make success criteria like flexible workforce or, you know, quicker provisioning time. No, you know, you need to break down these success objectives. You know, if it's quicker provisioning time, then how long is it going to take to actually provision? You know, clearly define the success criteria and then make sure you have something to measure against it. That's very important.
And then set expectations, right? So in this piece, you want to set expectations of not only the team involved, the vendors, make sure everyone's on the same page and everything's clearly defined. That way everyone knows what they're responsible for, what they should be doing, and that doesn't fall into the wayside.
Yep, and as far as expectations too, you want to make sure your expectations are set on the management side as well internally, and let them know that, hey, you know, this might not be the only solution that we have to do. Maybe we need a third-party integrator to work with us as well, or, you know, this isn't your sole desktop management solution. We need a strategy as well. You know, setting those expectations with users as well is important. And end-user bake-off discussion. That's a discussion that you're going to have internally about which end users are you going to test with. You know, that's critical, because if you don't test with the right end users, much like rolling out any project, it's just doomed to fail. You know, they'll spread negative feedback across the organization. It just doesn't work well. So it's important to pick the right users as part of the bake-off, you know, understand what they do, spend time sitting in their shoes, sitting next to them, understanding their workflows of exactly what they're doing, and make sure that you pick the right people.
And also, when you're picking those people as well, you know, try to pick up some low-hanging fruit, some easy wins, but don't ignore the tough situations. Because if you can solve those tough situations, those tough use cases, that could also make or break the bake-off as well, candidate.
Yep, and Another app here that Podio has, right, is determining features and functions, because we have business criteria, but then we have features and functions of the product that are important as well. You know, whether it's multi-monitor support or has special GPU pass-through settings or whatever, or specific policy settings. What are the features and functions that you require as a business? Your use case and stuff is going to help drive that, but where do you put those? So in Podio, you can actually go in and put your feature and function. You can rate it versus if it's required or nice to have and stuff like that. So in addition, we have determining hardware and software requirements. I guess I could just look down here. It'd probably be easier than kinking my neck, right? Determining hardware and software requirements really is, what are the different applications that you're going to include in the bake-off? What are those applications? What are all the different dependencies of the applications? How do they interact with each other? What is the peripheral devices that you're going to use? That's often forgot about, right?
Yeah, USB devices are usually big forgotten because, they might have foot pedals, might have something, and maybe one model won't work because of that, and you have to look at another model, and that could also eliminate a solution to bake-off as well.
Yeah, and printers are forgotten about as well. All the different functions. Don't just say, hey, does it print? No, test all the different pieces of the printer. All the different multi-functions of the printer. Does that work, right? So inside of the Podio application, you'll be able to add these peripheral devices, add it, whether it's hardware, you'll have links to the site for drivers, things like that, and associate those with the particular applications, right? The next piece is determining your rating system. That one has 2 Podio icons, so that's a super application. So left that there. So determining a rating system, right? So that's what we were talking about before. If you don't have a rating system, you have nothing to measure against at the end of the bake-off. How do you know which one's better, right? So determining the rating system in the cookbook, we walk through some examples. Whether it's 1 to 5 or 1 is Mickey Mouse, 5 is completely awesome, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's whatever you come up with so you can measure it at the end of the bake-off. Something needs to be determined and agreed on in the pre-bake-off meeting. And what's cool is the Podio app has the ability to rate. As you're doing your test cases, you just go in and rate them, and then you can sort based on the different ones. So maybe sort on 1, and then which is the lowest, and then have those available to talk about in the debrief meeting. Solution-specific discussion points, those are those long listed discussion points. We took the liberty working with some industry experts as well to come up with a nice list of discussion points with all the different areas, like we said, about delegation of administration, high availability, disaster recovery discussions, evaluating endpoints. These are important discussions that you need to have in your organization, and we put those inside of Podio for you to document on, okay?
And then once you get down to your solution-specific discussion points, you can actually, pick your bake-off candidates. Once you have all this criteria, all this information in there, you can start looking at the solutions out there and saying, okay, we know we need vendor A, vendor B, vendor C. Let's start engaging those vendors, getting the software in, and going through that whole process.
Do you think, if, for example, you're doing like bake-off between Zen Desktop and Vim Review, do you think it's better to have, let's say, 10 pilot users? Do you think it's better to have 5 of them working only on Zen Desktop and 5 only on Vim? Or is it better to have all of them working 1 week on one platform and 1 week on the other?
A good way, I'll take this one. A good way to do that would be to have them test both, but don't know what they're testing. So it's kind of like those blind taste test things, right? Which is better?
Coke versus Pepsi.
Exactly. Coke versus Pepsi, Google versus Bing, that kind of stuff. So, let them just do it. Don't tell them, which is vendor A or vendor B. Just have them test it and do it and then give feedback. And then at the end, that's how you can pick, and that's actually honest feedback criteria.
On average, how long do you set aside for doing this bake-off? How long does it typically take? 6 months, a year?
It depends on the organization size, what they're looking to do. You try to keep the scope smaller, but if it's a large organization, it can be extended. So typically, we've seen some of the bake-offs I've done have been, a month to 2 months long. So it, like I said, depends on what applications you're doing, how many different, bake-offs, or how many different vendors are they baking off, and things like that. So
Yeah, my experience, I've 30 days. Some have been 6 months to a year.
Okay.
So.
And are you?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. Are you putting all the results of all the various bake-offs together and in the cookbook, I'm guessing, and then there might be it might become a reference manual so that somebody with a similar organization and configuration might go, oh, okay, this is probably where we want to start for our scenario.
So that's awesome you brought that up. So that's kind of what the future, what we're looking to do with what Tech Bake-Off is that you do all this bake-off, you go through this framework that you follow, you come up with, because at the end of the day, we're coming up with a blanket list of discussion points, but if you're in education or you're in healthcare or financial services, you're going to have very different discussion points. So you're going to build your own through the Podio app or whatever the engine is, and then you can allow those to be submitted to a central resource, and then you would then go to the site and say, I'm looking to do a bake-off, you fill out some information, and then a cookbook could be be generated, or your Podio workspace could be auto-generated. That's why we're looking for some feedback, because there's some really cool stuff you could do with the APIs where you deploy the Podio app pack and it can auto-populate discussion points and test cases. So, we want to, as we go through the Podio workspace, what's your feedback? That's really valuable to us. So see if it makes sense to keep moving forward with that. So.
Wait, another question out there?
Yeah, I think there's one.
I was just going to point out, with your question about the length of the bake-off, I think it depends on the use case that you're shooting for. Right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
if you have some knowledge or task workers, you could probably say, okay, well, I could get away with maybe a month or 2 months, but we're getting ready to do one now, for instance, for a computer lab, and we're going to do it for a whole semester, because I work in higher ed, so just kind of, it gives people a good length of time to really figure out, which one.
Right.
From all aspects.
Yeah, that's important, and it's important too to keep kind of we're walking through the Podio workspace and stuff, to keep a framework around it and have an owner of that bake-off to make sure, because sometimes when they're extended over a period of time, people then become disinterested or kind of move on to other things, and then it's like, oh, this bake-off, oh, what was that again? So it's kind of it's important to keep an eye on that.
That raises an interesting question, though, because what he's describing sounds more like what I would call a pilot.
Yep.
Like where you're
It is,
actually
yeah.
running for a period of time, where I think of a bake-off as more like I'm going to choose a vendor.
Yeah, because
Does have some thoughts on that difference?
Yeah, because the pilot may be more of, you already had the bake-off, you've already chosen the solution, now you're going to start the pilot before going into the other phases of it. So that's kind of the post-bake-off piece of that. If you've already chosen a vendor, now if you're doing more than one vendor during that semester and they don't know and you're testing like that, then it's a bake-off.
That's what we're doing.
Okay,
So we're actually mixing and matching.
Okay, and it's important, we didn't really chat on this, we talked about in our last session, but as far as knowing that duration ahead of time, because typically the vendor licenses that come in are maybe 30 days, some are 60 days, some are 90 days. So get all that up front, because you're going to be doing your pilot and it's going to stop working. So.
but don't be afraid to go back to the vendor and
Yeah.
ask for another trial license. Like I said, I've had one that lasted a year and we had to keep getting them trial licenses and so forth. So you can go back to the vendor and ask for that.
Have a question?
Yeah, just another comment on that setting expectations box. In bake-offs that we've done in the past, if you've got a wide variety, which you should, of people inside that room, you can have, especially people you have desktop people. Desktop people only care about what's inside the OS.
Correct.
In a POC or in a bake-off, you're gonna have problems of, we got the infrastructure guy in there, well, I need to test availability, I need to test resiliency, what's the backup plan, how hard is it to restore the solution? So all of a sudden your bake-off goes from a 30-day window to, now we have to go take it offline, now we have to do all the kinds of resiliency testing for the infrastructure guys. And then to pick up again also on to POC status, once it starts to drag out, it's such a gray area, because then it becomes POC, well then people just, well, we'll look at production, starting to get some usage on it. And now you've got a non-highly available system that you've never tested with GPR on, it's quote-unquote production because an executive is using it.
Right.
Setting expectations.
That's unfortunate.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And that's one of the points we come in and say, this does not go into production. From this, we take the information, we pick the vendor, and that helps determine production, but this is not your production environment. And that's clearly stated very early in the process.
Yeah, and it's also in the cookbook as well. And as part of that is determining your hardware that you're actually baking off on. In some cases, you can lean on your vendors and actually get hardware to test with. Keep that as a segregated, separate environment. The only piece that's really going to involve a lot of the testing is administrative and operational testing, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how cool it is to admins or operations teams, right? The end user's got to be happy. His experience has got to be good. So they do need to test it. It's important and they need to test with their data, not just walk through workflows and say, okay, this works. They have to test with their data. So pieces of that are going to be pushed in. So it's important, like you said, to have the expectations set and stuff like that. So actually the bake-off, so we have our master chef up there again, and now we're into the bake-off stage. Pre-bake-off is done. We kind of worked everything out. We got our outline, our team's built, tasks are set. We're getting ready to make things happen. We already determined our solution, and now we're setting meetings with our chosen vendors, telling them about our bake-off, how we have this process, and setting expectations. We're looking at setting install dates, installing the actual solutions, and then reviewing test cases. Okay, so what's that? Well, if you follow the framework, you have a list of kind of blanket test cases, but at the end of the day, those might not apply to what you're doing. Maybe you need to really test rigorously printing, or maybe you need to test image updates, or what the life cycle looks like for image updates, or maybe help desk is more important for you and how that integration happens. So you have to look at kind of what we provided and start making, and if you use the Podio app and that works out, right, you can just click add test case and walk through, what is the test step? what is the expected result, what's the actual result, which is going to be when you're testing, and then rate it. So you can build your own test cases. So that's really what happens at that point. And then you actually test your test cases. That's test cases. Said that twice. So you're actually going to put your test cases or put your solutions side by side and start going through these test cases and testing. And test cases are broken down into administrative testing, operations team testing, and then your end user piece. Those are where your end users are actually testing it. It's critical to test that. And then, yes, we broke those down. And then you're rating each solution rate each test case. And that's where that rating system comes in that you predefined. You're going to go ahead and rate each test case and then compile that at the end and talk about that in the post bake-off meeting. Well, there it is. So you're going to compile a bake-off report. Here we go. This is my feedback from my discussion points that I talked about. Here's my feedback from the actual test cases. And you're going to have a debrief meeting to talk about, what were the experiences that you had, what was good, what was the bad, what was the ugly, And talk about those things with your vendors. Maybe there's a feature that's missing in one product. Okay, but what's the roadmap? So have that roadmap discussion with the product. We had a bake-off in the past where this was back going VMware 5 or Zen Desktop 5.6, where they didn't have the delegation of administration breakdown, but they had that in VMware View. They had it in the Zen app side, but they didn't have it in the Zen Desktop side. So it became an issue for the client, but then we started talking more about, well, let's have a roadmap discussion with Citrix. And we saw that was on the roadmap for the future, and it was okay at that point. So, because they're doing more Zen apps. So it's important to have those roadmap discussions, as part of that debrief meeting.
Also, as part of that external debrief meeting as well, as you're getting that feedback and compiling information, when you're sharing that with the vendor, not only the roadmap, but maybe you had some problems and they said, okay, we have some fixes for that already. Then you can go back, retest again, and come back with feedback. So make sure you share that information with the vendor, because one, it could be a roadmap thing. Two, it could be a patch. It could be something that was addressed that didn't get taken care of during the bake-off. So that's why it's important to have that debrief discussion externally.
Yep. And then you're going to vote on a final solution. At that point, there's a little vote app in Podio, which, that just happens to be there. And that vote app basically what it allows you to do is actually, you can come in as a contact, you put your name, and then you go in and put kind of just, why did you choose that solution? Put some of your thoughts out there. People can comment on it and whatnot, and then actually go ahead and choose a solution. Then you can sort through that and talk about it internally in a central spot. And then after, so this is all kind of finalized at that point. Now you're going to look at kind of, well, what is the cost of this whole thing? You need to look at do an assessment. Understand the hardware costs, the sizing, or do some sizing requirements. Get kind of some budgetary numbers, but think about cost across the whole stack. You talk to a storage vendor and they'll say, well, I can do a desktop for $200. Or you talk to this guy and he says he can do it for $300. But they only talk about their little piece of the desktop. What is the whole cost of the desktop? What is the operational cost? All those pieces are important, and really make sure you get that done in that post bake-off session.
And also kind of look at what's the cost going to be year 1, year 2, year 3, et cetera. How's that look over the lifetime? Because you want to understand that budgetary process there as well. So you're not saying, okay, year 3 we have this big, huge bill. Where'd that come from? You're not surprised. So. Yep.
All right, sweet. So we're going to walk through this Podio bake-off scenario. I'm going to walk through it. I could spend hours talking through all the different pieces of Podio. I love what it does and what it's capable of. So we're going to walk through a scenario to kind of show you guys some features. We're going to walk through the rest of the presentation. Hopefully, if we have time at the end, I can dig into different pieces or come up at the end and we can walk through the workspace and stuff like that. So basically, walk through the scenario, right? So there's a company, Tech Bake-off Incorporated. It's got some business needs, related to, expanded growth. It's looking for remote workers. They can't find local talent, so they're trying to do remote call, work from home call centers. And the bake-off candidates that they're happening to be looking at, and they determined this ahead of time, was kind of View Horizon, Zen Desktop, and vWorkspace. Ooh, Podio demo. Okay. All right. So it just happens to be up here. So now we can actually see inside of Podio. So can you guys see that? Is that too small? Let me see if I can zoom in here. Is that better? Yep. Okay, so basically Podio consists of applications, and I'll walk through kind of a high level. We're going to walk through the workflow, and this will all start making sense. So first thing we have is a project, right? Because we're doing a bake-off, we need to define a project. So inside of the project, it's a Desktop Virtualization Bake-off. The way Podio works is it's all applications. I inputted some data. It slides over to the right. You can see these are all predefined fields that you set up. Every application has a workflow. It has, and it's so easy to build an application because an application consists of just building blocks. There are text fields or image fields or contact fields or web links, and you just build what makes sense for you. So we have a project name, project manager just happens to be myself. Project kickoff start dates, and then we built a calculation in here because you can do that with Podio. But, what is the budget, right? So don't 20,000. It doesn't mean your bake-off budget's going to be that crazy number. I just happen to put that in there. But so 20,000. So you assign a budget, and then this project actually gets associated with the different deliverables and tasks, and we'll deduct based on what you're assigning to the other pieces of the project. So it's a nice high-level overview from a project manager standpoint. And all the related applications inside of Podio get rolled up. So you can quickly look down, okay, here's my phases of the project. Here's tasks involved. Here's some documents that we were talking about as far as new VDI reality, kind of baking through the FUD, some inventory items, and we're going to go through the rest of this. Oh, look, a whiteboard. That's pretty cool. So let's walk through that, right? So like I said before, here's your tasks. You can kind of see here. These are all the tasks related to the bake-off, right? And each task can be assigned resources, and it can be assigned, all sorts of stuff. And all these tasks are associated with calendar invites, and that's all done through Podio. So let's talk about the first task, which I didn't click on, but it talks about determining business needs, right? So if you click on determining business needs, oh, it just pops over here. Okay, phase reference is pre-bake-off, sequence is one. Oh, Frank Rizzo happens to be the task owner. Who knows who Frank Rizzo is? All right, some jerky boys, right? How you doing? All right, so task due date, right? Is it started? What's the progress? Description. Oh, use the YDV, Y Desktop Virtualization Podio app to answer your business needs question. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Thank you. So you go ahead and click that. And you're able to, let me scroll over to the right, you can add discovery questions. So maybe that's, as an integrator, you add those ahead of time for when you come on site, or if you're working internally, you have them preset. We're going to include some of those and can import them into the space, but we're going to just talk through one here, right? Let's go ahead and have a look. Okay, so discovery question. What kind of problems does your organization have? What kind of challenges? What are you looking to accomplish when, with desktop virtualization? The response, it basically talks through the business need. They're expanding, geographically, or they can't find local talent. They want to expand, so they want to do remote home from work. We'll go ahead and rate that priority order. How important is that to the business? I say it's a 5 because it's pretty important, and it's a use case as a call center. So once you determine your business needs, you're going to go ahead and determine success criteria, right? Because we stressed how important that is. So you're going to come over here and actually click, we predefine this. If you didn't have it, you can just click Add Success Criteria, and it'll just walk you through the process. But let's take a look at what was already added, because this organization already did all their homework, right? So success criteria, they're looking at smooth user experience, including voice, accessing virtual desktops remotely through call centers, right? Well, why are they looking for that? What's the target that you really want to accomplish for that? How are you going to measure success? Okay, they're going to use technically they're going to use some tools from Link to basically, it talks in here about Microsoft Link being a requirement. You're going to use some tools to test jitter and call quality and end user experience testing. What's the criticality of this, right? You can rate that. And then just look here, related features and functions. Oh, it happens to be Microsoft Link. So this related item is another application in Podio that links to each other, right? So we're going to take a look at whiteboard for a second, because how many times are you guys in meetings, whether it's, and think about the bake-off in scenarios like this. You have vendors come in, and they go ahead and do all this whiteboarding, and everything's all great, and then they leave, and then the whiteboard's erased, next meeting comes in. Maybe you take a snapshot with your photo and you send it out, but where does it go? It gets lost in translation. Here you can go ahead and what's cool is Podio is mobile-based as well. It's an awesome app. You can access all these applications in this interface from mobile, from your mobile phone, and you can just snap a photo and upload it instantly into Podio. So here's a unified communications architecture. Don't click on that because it might not look like what it is. But so you have different, you can determine the different types of whiteboards, right? So it's a notes discussion around user printer. I was supposed to say end user experience discussion, but basically you can map that to a solution reference. So in this case, it was a Zen desktop discussion. It was mapped to the desktop virtualization bake-off project, and the phase is the bake-off. And then maybe as you're going through your bake-off, you have multiple whiteboards in here that you can always refer back to in a central spot. And again, with Podio, everything is task-based. So I can just hit T on my keyboard, it pops up a task window. I can assign a task to a resource on anything related into the project.
This is coming very handy, this whiteboard feature, because again, things get erased, you have multiple meetings, you go back to it like, oh, I wish I would have taken a picture of that and had it stored somewhere that everyone can see it, and during some bake-offs I've done, it's coming very handy.
Yep, so I'm not going to click on these, and we can go through these afterwards if there's time. So, meetings. Meetings are all the different tasks that you have, right? All the different meetings that you're going to have, whether it's with your internal IT team, the different teams, the vendors, the integrators. You can go ahead and assign those meetings. Guess what? There's GoToMeeting integration. It'll actually start the GoToMeeting from inside Podio, send out the invite. So everything's tracked inside of Podio. Podio can export the calendar into Outlook, all sorts of cool stuff like that. Contacts those are all your contacts. I'll just click on that for a second because I just like the way it looks. So you can see, I like the colors, all right? Looks cool. So you can see the resource type. Is it internal, vendor, or VAR? Is it a bake-off team lead? Is it a team member? And then you can see what they're associated with. If you click on, for instance, Frank Rizzo, you can see he's a CIO of Tech Bake-off, you know? But yeah, so that's all stored there, and we'll skip through the discussions piece, but I just want to get to a app here. Basically, that's the library app. So there's things like we talked about, cooking through the FUD, you know. Let's go ahead and store all the resources of the document. You know, how's that look on screen, by the way? Can you see that? Okay, so you can actually see, oops, so I clicked on one, VDI Smackdown. You can see there's different categories. It's a white paper, it's related to industry advice. Well, what's the audience for this? Is it C-level? Is it engineering? Is it the different bake-off teams? And then you can attach the file for people to look at. So think about all those things that are going to be a part of the bake-off, all the different documentation, that's all stored in there like we said. Okay, so now we're going to get to the bake-off, right? Here's the discussion points. We talked about before, this is a unified communications workflow that we're kind of running through in Podio. So here's a discussion point related to that. So if we go ahead and edit it, you can see here, these are all the different topics we talked about. They're all in here in Podio, and they're chosen, right? So unified communications, here's the discussion point. You know, will the virtual desktop require integration with existing unified communications or VoIP solutions? Okay, who's the audience for this conversation? Think about that, because discussion points are going to involve different team members, right? So, okay, it's a systems engineer, it's a network engineer, and we're going to have the bake-off lead because he really needs to be involved in everything to make sure there's, you know, things are getting done. And then you can start putting down some notes on that conversation as you're talking to your vendor. I type really fast. So then you come in here and you can choose a discussion category. Is it administrative, is it operations, or is it end user experience focused, which isn't there, but that will be there. And then go ahead and complete the discussion point at that point, right? And you can save it. So if you look here, just to show you, this discussion point, right, is just one discussion point. We mentioned, you know, there's over, I think, 120 of them, right? So if we go ahead and in Podio, everything can be filtered. I'm just going to uncheck unified communications. You can kind of see, here's all your discussion points that we talked about. All the different topics, update, you know, user workspace, update process, what's the migration plan, support resources, software licensing, tons of stuff in here. That's all in Podio. You can just click and walk through them and filter based on who you want to talk to, right? You can click over here and see audience. Maybe it's just a CIO level conversation. Okay, let's scroll up. Okay, it's mobility conversation. Walk through that, right? So that's, what do you guys think so far? Is this cool stuff? Is this something that's interesting? Is this, all right, cool. One more thing. No. That's good. That's good feedback. Clap is good. All right. So solutions basically are your actual solutions. You're going to store your solutions in there. That's going to be your different vendors are going to get put in there. They're going to be associated with contacts. We're going to walk through this one and then two more, and then we're going to continue on. Reference. This is a customer reference application. We talked about that. I wanted to show you it because we talked about it. Here's a customer reference. You click Add Reference, and it walks you through it. So now everything's tracked in Podio. You come over here, reference organization's BriForum, reference contact is Brian Madden, and reference owner, because he's the CIO, is Frank Rizzo from Jerky Boys. So there's a reference call date. That date is associated with a calendar invite. So boom, it gets sent over. If we set this up as a go-to-meeting, a go-to-meeting invite would be sent to the customer as well as everyone internally. And then we build some sample questions in here, but you can build your own. You know, so that you can ask the customer reference. You know, what is the scope of the deployment? You know, what are challenges that you face? What does the operations lifecycle look like? And different sort of stuff in here about vendor support and everything. But you can come through, put all your responses, attach it to a solution reference, maybe associate some task, and then someone can come in and comment on it, right? But now it's all stored in a central spot. So that's really for the reference piece as far as you know, getting customer references. Features and functions, not going to walk through that, but that's where you can actually add. Actually, I'll do that because it makes sense to the workflow. Microsoft Link, that's part of the unified communications workflow. Here's a feature name, description of the feature. Is it required? Is it a nice to have? Or is it a script, you know, scope for future projects? And then we relate that back to the success criteria because that's going to be tied to it. Okay. Second here, bam, pop that open. Okay, so license, not going to click on that, but that's where you store your licenses from the vendors, trial licenses. What's the scope of the license? Is it named versus user versus device, concurrent, whatever? All that's stored there, your trial license, and you can set start dates and end dates for the license so you get alerted when they fail or when they expire.
Yeah, that way it's getting close. You get some kind of notification instead of you come in, everything's down because, day 31 or day 91 hits and everything stops working.
So this is really cool, right? Applications, because as part of the bake-off, you need to test applications. So you can come in here, assign an application. We're going to go ahead and just walk through one. It happens to be Microsoft Link because it relates to the workflow we're talking about. So here's Microsoft Link. Application type is 32 or 64-bit. Application owner happens to be Brian Madden again. He owns everything. Number of users, number of users is 100. Department's a call center, right? Application requirements and prerequisites. Where are the install bits located? All these things are like, think if you go in to do an assessment or whatever, you're going to have all this in Excel. Now it's all in Podio in a single spot. All these categories can be changed, dragged in, dragged out, and really anything that you want. So operating system support, what type of workload is it? Is it GPU required, light, medium, heavy? That can all be changed as well. Access requirements. Security group, is it remote access restrictions, things like that. But this is really cool. Oh, look, this just so happens this application has a peripheral device. What's that? Boom, there it is. You click that, it goes over to the hardware application and associates it as a peripheral device and pulls it in here. So now you can see associated with this application is the important peripheral. You can see it's a Polycom CX100 IP phone. Oh, wait, maybe they need another peripheral. Oh, they need a foot pedal for some reason. They need that. So they click that, and they can add that in as another peripheral device. When's the install date? Who's performing it? And those are some of the things that we put in there as kind of an example for you guys. So those all can be added, and this can be, all these discussion points, test cases, and apps can be imported through Excel. So if you had a whole list of applications, we can have criteria set up, and it'll just suck them all up into Podio.
Or even today, maybe you're starting with Excel sheets, passing those around back and forth, editing them. You can simply import those today and then start using Podio as well.
Yep, and then one more for you guys is, well, two more, this is it. So hardware, so this is just what we talked about. Here's all your hardware, here's some printers and peripheral devices, and you can go ahead and filter on those, just add a hardware item, maybe it's a peripheral, what type of hardware interface does it have, because that's important. And then is it vendor supported, that's really critical, because if it's not vendor supported, then maybe you need to rule that vendor out. How critical is that a peripheral device to you? And the last piece there's some other stuff, but I think this is the most important, is test cases. This is where you're actually testing your bake-off candidates against each other. Here's all the test cases. We talked about this before. Here's all your categories. Here's your audience, who's going to be involved, systems engineering, bake-off lead, administrator. But we're going to go ahead and filter on unified communications because that's our workflow. So you come down here, test case topic, unified communications. Oh, what happened here? Oh, it all disappeared. Look at that. So now you can click here, and here's my test case. And you can see what audience is going to be involved. We're testing for user experience. And you can see here that the test step is to remotely launch the call center, desktop, et cetera. But you'll actually see if you edit this, because this is what you would do as part of the testing phase, is you can actually go ahead, well, what's my expected results? What's the actual results of my test for the solution? Here's your rating. 1 being Mickey Mouse, head back to Disneyland. Maybe 4 is not so great. And 5 is awesome. Predefine this ahead of time, and then you can change the names and stuff in Podio. We'll go ahead and rate this a 1, and it's associated with View Horizon. And if you need to add another solution candidate, or you can just choose their drop-downs, right? So what we'll see here as part of this app here is rating. That's important, because once you're done looking at the solution, right, you need to determine what rating what the lowest ratings are or highest ratings, so you can have conversations with the vendor. So you just pop over here, and here's all your ratings for all the different test cases. You'll just simply click on one, and it will filter so you can have the conversation, print out that view, and things like that. So that really wraps up the Podio piece. There's a vote app that we spoke about where you can kind of walk through, add a contact while you're looking at it and vote on the solution, and then associate that with the report over here on the right side. So that kind of walks through the workflow of a unified communications business case. We showed you kind of some of the different pieces of Podio that are in there, and we can dig more into that if you guys want. So just overall feedback, because this is really going to determine if we're going to build this and make it available inside of Podio. Podio has a whole app store. There's hundreds of apps that are freely available that you can go to Podio, search for Bake-off, and then you'll be able to hit deploy, and it'll make a workspace for you with all these apps. If it's valuable. Do you guys see value in this? Would you use it in a bake-off?
Yeah, good.
All right, cool. Guess we'll take that as a yes, as a clap, as a yes. All right, cool. So jumping back, right? So boom. Oh, that wasn't supposed to show. All right. So we talked through the you know, kind of the whole pre-bake-off, the framework. We wanted to touch on two other things for this presentation. Talking a little bit more about business needs and choosing your candidates, and really digging into the results. What are the bake-off experiences that we had? We want to get into that section. So, you know, deeper dive into determining business needs. Ooh. All right, I got to pay for that, I guess. This is recorded. I will be paying for that traffic, I promise. So, why? You know, that's an important question. Why do we need to dive deeper into our business needs? Because at the end of the day, without proper alignment between your business needs and the technology, your project is going to fail. You're going to pick a technology because it was whether politically chosen or vendor relationships that were already had in the organization, or because you know, it's just cool. So you want to make sure you have that alignment.
And then down here, you know, this quote does ring true. You know, you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. So again, back to the whole bake-off process, your success criteria, you know, all your planning. If you have nothing, you know, set in there, how do you know when it's going to finish, and how are you going to know what's going to win and what's going to be chosen?
Yep. So, you know, misunderstanding leads to bad decisions, and that's kind of what we just talked about. And we mentioned this. We talked about a lot of these pieces, so we're going to pump through them because we talked about a lot of this in the beginning. But at the end of the day, if you don't understand why you're doing something, you're going to make bad decisions, and those bad decisions could be picking technology for the wrong reasons. So some of the things are vague goals and understanding. You know, you see things like this, whether it's VDI or flexible workforce, remote access. A lot of times we go into customers and they predefine and say, I want to do VDI. Or I want a flexible workforce. Okay, well, why do you want that?
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, you know, what does that mean? Yeah. I got to do my yoga stretch. So, you know, these things are predetermined when you come in there, and they don't really relate to any critical business needs of what they have going on. So you want to make sure that you break those down.
And also, you also make sure, you know, educate the customer more so they can kind of explain to you more what they actually want, because sometimes, you know, I want VDI. Well, that, you know, again, that's a broad statement, and you got to talk the customer off that ledge and say, well, maybe you don't need VDI, maybe you need shared hosted model, maybe you need client-side virtualization. So, you know, you got to think about that and have that discussion. Make sure to educate them and get them to understand what exactly they want.
Yep.
Can I tell you just something real funny? Really
Shoot.
We had a huge organization come to us because they wanted VDI, and we looked at their problem. What they needed was roaming profiles.
Yep. No, yeah.
That's a true statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
We see that all the time, and we'll go in, and it's like, you know, whether they read about it in CIO magazine or it's just the cool thing. And marketing's a lot to blame sometimes for stuff like this because they make it seem all cool. And a lot of that stuff can be solved by existing technologies you have. Maybe you need just a better desktop management process. Maybe you need better provisioning process. You know, whether, you know, there's solutions, Landesk, Altiris. This stuff already exists in your organization. Leverage that. Maybe you don't need the VDI solution or server-based computing. You know, it's been around forever, right?
Goes back to education and training. So
yep.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, so some questions, you know, this kind of goes back to the basics. You look at this like, well, this isn't stuff, you know, this isn't, you know, this is basic stuff. But it really goes back to the basics when you're having these conversations, you know. So questions you'd ask, you know, it always, like I said, it always comes down to the following, you know, what does this desired end result look like? What's your vision? What do you want? So they'll talk through, well, VDI. Well, actually, I'll wait because we're going to talk through two scenarios. So, and then what are you doing now? What is your current experience like? How is it today? What, you know, how are you managing your desktops? Whatever the scenarios, walk through those things. So now you just got what the vision is like, what are they doing today, and then how is the solution you're considering going to get you there? What technology pieces, how do you feel? And then you talk through those things, and then you're going to, as you walk through these scenarios, oh, there happens to be one there, you know, you're going to start seeing different things, you know, that will make sense. Maybe at the end, well, let's walk through one. So, you know, quicker provisioning time. Okay, so what are those questions? So what is your target objective for success? I want quicker provisioning time. Okay, well, what is the target objective? Is it 45 minutes? What is it, you know, is it an hour? Is it 10 minutes? So we got to talk through that, you know, define that. How do you know, how do you do it now and how long does it currently take? Well, that's important to know because you want to see what their process is and how long does it actually take today so you can measure against that and see, you know, get in the right time frame. And then what does the end provisioning process look like? What are the technologies? And at the end of the day, these are all kind of business discussions, but then you have your engineer in the room and his thought bubbles thinking of all this crazy technology to make those needs happen. And he's thinking about, you know, what's the current provisioning method? Is it Pixie? Is it Ghost? Is it non-persistent desktops? Are we going to do persistent desktops? Where's our data going to be? And all these things are flying around in his head. And he talks that fast too when he's doing it. So it kind of gives you an idea, right? And then the second piece is flexible workforce.
You know, again, you know, what is your vision? Because my interpretation and your interpretation can be two different things. Could it be just going around internally, roaming to different workstations? Could it be you want to be able to work from home wherever? So, find that out. Get their vision, their interpretation of what that actually means. And then what's your current experience today? What's the problem today? What do you want to solve? How do you want to get there? And then, what solution will you to flexible workforce as you define it? So in this one, take this one.
Yeah, so basically what we're talking about here is, in the beginning we created a vision. I want a flexible workforce. Well, flexible workforce maybe only means I want a flexible workforce from iPads or from Kindle devices. So you need to, by knowing that vision of what the CIO wants from a flexible workforce, you can then map the solutions to it. Maybe that's his vision includes a flexible workforce that's also secure. So you need to look at some sort of enterprise mobility management.
But also includes disaster recovery as well.
Right, disaster recovery could be a part of that. And the engineer is sitting there thinking in that meeting, he's thinking about all kinds of crazy stuff. He's talking about what kind of devices, is it any location, are there security requirements? All these things are popping around in his head. And at the end of the day, that breakdown will allow you to determine, what technology makes the most sense. Business need, VDI, right?
This is the big one, right? Everyone says, I want VDI.
Right? Yeah, So, what's the vision? What are you currently, how are you managing your desktops today? And what is the delivery models to accomplish this vision of VDI, right? The CIO's response, I don't care about your questions. I keep hearing I should do it. Why? Because CIO Magazine says so. He doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care about all your discovery questions. He just wants to do it. So that's when you get up on the board and you start talking about cost. You show him one model versus the next model and all the hardware required, and you start breaking all these things down. And his decision is going to change pretty quickly, or maybe not. Depends if they really need it.
Yeah, usually when they see, what's involved, what the cost is, that kind of backs them off and starts getting the real things they want to get done. It takes that term VDI away and says, well, I want this, maybe I just want applications, maybe I just want a better way for users to roam, I want DR, those type of things will start happening.
Yeah, so picking your solution candidates, this slide kind of just tells it itself. When it comes to solutions, there's so many solutions on the market. They all have similar technology, they all provide similar results, but there's different features and functionalities and why it makes sense for the business. Not only features and functionality, but it's also what are your vendor relationships? Is there a political stuff involved? There's a lot of different reasons why you would go with a different solution, and we're going to walk through some ideas to help you drive that, whether it's application requirements or peripheral devices. So we're going to pump through that real quick here. So, you got to map your business needs to your features and functions. We talked about that before. Depending on what your business needs is going to clearly define the features and functions of the product you require. That will then go ahead and eliminate certain products. For instance, I don't want to give it away. He's going to talk through some scenarios. But so I guess I got to give it for instance because I already said that. So for instance, now I'm on the line here. So basically, for instance, if you have a I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Great. Now I'm in the spot. So anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say, okay, well, quicker provisioning time or whatever, or it's image management updates, or maybe it's rollback functionality for images. Do you have the ability to do a full life cycle of image deployment, create rollbacks, and then document based on that? Maybe you have a fully detailed documented process. Can you do that inside of your current solution today, or something like that? So reference calls matching your industry and use case. And
this one's big because if you're in financial industry, you want to talk to someone in the same industry that's done it to see what their challenges were, what worked, what failed, get that kind of feedback. You don't be calling someone in healthcare or someone in manufacturing because it's going to be a different experience for them based on the different industry.
Yep, and so you want to be mindful of your existing skill set in the organization. And the reason for that is because, in one way you can think, well, I got a whole entire VMware team that really understands the hypervisor, they understand application virtualization, I'm going to go VMware. But maybe when you start talking about business needs and features and functions, there's something else in Citrix or Quest that makes more sense for you. Maybe you want to broker Linux desktops. Aha, another use case popped up. And maybe you want to broker Linux desktops. Well, that functionality isn't available in all these solutions. If that's a big use case, you need to start looking at something else. So you want to be mindful of the skill set that you have. It's good that you have some existing skills, but map those skills to features and functions. And sometimes you need to move forward with a product that maybe you don't have a comfort level with, and that you need to understand what that impact is going to be to the organization. Back of napkin estimates, that's basically just get some high-level cost numbers, because I've been down the road of doing a bake-off before. Everything looks great, people love the technology, and then they start talking about cost and licensing, and then the vendor doesn't want to work with them, and then they end up going off looking at another solution. So talk through some of those things. And cost is variable, right? It depends on the time of the month. It depends on a lot of different things. How big is the order and all this sort of stuff. But get a good idea of the cost and how the licensing model works for the entire stack.
And then future direction of solutions candidates, kind of understand the roadmap, where they're going. Is something you choose today going to lock you into something you can't easily get out of in the future, right? Maybe you're looking forward to, more monitors, different types of security requirements, those type of things. Make sure you kind of understand what's on the roadmap. That way you're not stuck somewhere and spend a lot of money and then you're angry.
Yep, yeah, yeah, because that happens.
You don't want to get locked into something.
Yeah, that's for sure. And understand your applications. We talked through a little bit about this, but to summarize this slide, basically know your application, understand its dependencies, understand how it speaks, because applications speak to you. But understand what its tie-ins are. This gets a little bit technical, but where does the application write to? Because that helps when you're talking about profile integration and things like that. Understand all the different pieces of the application. Is there hardware peripheral devices and things like that? Does it have plug-in dependencies and stuff like that's important? And understand how your current method of application deployment, whether it's web-based, RDS, virtualized applications or whatever, how is that going to map to your future set of solutions that you're looking at?
You also want to know, what the application performance impact looks like as well. That's going to help you when you're sizing out your environment.
Yep. And understand your hardware. We talked a little bit about this, but at the end of the day, know what's in your environment. That's going to be included in the bake-off. Know about your critical use cases. If you're dealing with special multifunction printers or peripheral devices, whether it's like the VoIP stuff, or you're looking at foot pedals or pin reset devices for banks, understand what those are and make sure you test those as part of the bake-off. Because if you don't, you're going to go down a road and finding out maybe it's not supported by the vendor, or it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or it works only in this supported delivery model, which then means there's a lot more costs associated with it. So understand those pieces.
Yeah, and then USB devices is a big one here, because you could go into a shared hosted model where you actually need a desktop or a client-side desktop because of the USB requirements. So make sure you check all the USB devices, because that's been a big issue in some past deployments. So.
Yep. Yeah, this is a big one, vendor support, and this is vendor support from. Go ahead.
So, hardware requirements. Do you recommend doing a lakeside extract discovery or something before in parallel? How do you understand all those hardware requirements? Because 90% of the customers that I work with have no idea what's out there. So do you have assessment?
That's a very good question. So, and it depends too. Some customers are very good at documenting things, so sometimes you can do them parallel. A lot of times we'll recommend do it beforehand, kind of get that data going. That way we can come in and say, okay, you thought you had this, here's what you really have, and this is what we need to start looking at because of that. So that's a very good point.
And solutions, like you said, Lakeside, Liquidware has a solution as well. If you're looking at more of the application piece, there's App DNA, so there's some different solutions out there.
Even Res has an application that can go out and just pull back the desktops and see what's out there. So.
And then vendor support is basically, make sure these solutions, you have a local subject matter expert, whether it's an SE that's in the area from your different vendors, is there an integrator that's available? Make sure they're there to assist you as part of the setup and throughout the bake-off, that they don't just set you up, leave you, and then leave you, for dead, to just play with a solution. You want to make sure you have support.
An issue comes up, you don't want to be hanging high and dry and waiting for a vendor to get back to you, or a partner. You want to make sure that they have skin in the game too. They're there to assist you. That way everything continues to roll smoothly and things don't get delayed.
Yeah, that's a good point. So real world feedback.
All right, so here's one customer I've been working with, and they were a long-time customer. They are pure as an app environment. Everything was deployed on vSphere outside of XenApp. XenApp was deployed on Zen Server. The server team controlled this part of the company. They wanted to roll out to all their desktops and their end users and expand the solution. So the desktop team was owned by a different manager. Well, the manager didn't like Citrix. He's like, I don't want it. I want to look at other things. Even though we came in and did a bake-off, we said, okay, we're still going to look at Citrix. You guys already have a big investment in it. But let's talk about what you're looking to do, what you need. And so we also had Vue and vWorkspace in there. They ended up going with vWorkspace, and deployment failed. It wasn't because of the product or the solution, it was because of the deployment. So, when it comes to those type of things, they undersize the hardware a lot, undersize the storage. So it quickly, went off the tracks there. This was Hyper-V, vWorkspace. It gave them a very bad taste of Hyper-V in their mouth because of it, and I kept trying to explain to them, don't blame the technology, it's because it wasn't architected right. So coming back again, they said, okay, we have this large investment in XenApp and Citrix already. Let's see what we can do. Vue got taken out because they wanted to still stay with some of the shared hosted model. Plus, they were able to transition their licenses from XenApp to Zen Desktop and do the 2-for-1 type thing. So what happened in the end, we ended up deploying Zen Desktop on Zen Server. And actually, this is probably one of my best Zen Server deployments here because they're probably my most stable one. So, so that was one issue where they had the bake-off, we went through everything, they picked a solution, but they didn't architect it right. And this was done by another partner on the Vue Workspace side. We did the Vue and Zen Desktop. And so they went back to the drawing board, and we were very careful going forward and took very small baby steps when we went through this process to make sure that the actual production rollout was proper, they had performance. We started off with, this is a healthcare customer, we started off with one hospital and did one hospital over a weekend, the entire hospital. The doctors came down, have not been happier in years. So it comes back to making sure following the process, understanding everything, sizing it right, knowing what's out there, going through that methodology. Another customer, longtime customer of ours, no desktop virtualization whatsoever. Everything's just regular desktops. The only virtualization they had was vSphere for their servers. We came in, they said, we want to look at how to better improve our DR process, how to do allow people to work from home, work from anywhere, traveling stuff, all these different types of things they had in this deployment they wanted to talk about. So when I came in here, and this was actually a pretty good customer because when I came in, there was no agenda. There was no I read this vendor versus this vendor, we're a VMware shop already, why aren't we going down this path? They just came in and said, let's just talk about desktop virtualization and how it can help our company. And the VP of IT, he had every person from the departments in there of IT in the room at the same time. We had security, we had storage, we had server, we had desktop, we had the application managers. Everybody was in the room during this meeting, and they're able to ask questions, get feedback, like how's this going to help us with DR? What's the application lifecycle look like? How can we integrate it? What's the desktop rollout going to look like? So during the bake-off, we talked about RDS, we talked about Vue Workspace, Vue, and Zen Desktop. We ended up baking off Vue and Zen Desktop. During the bake-off, we also did Unidesk for both Zen Desktop and Vue as well. In the end, two things kind of won them over. One of them I wasn't the happiest about, but that's such is life. They went on Zen Desktop on vSphere. One of the big things that got them was remote PC access because very early on, they said, well, we want to kind of get rid of VPN. He goes, we don't want to keep supporting it, paying for it, this and that. So I was like, well, let's try remote PC out, see how you like that. Absolutely loved it. Their IT guys were like, we want this. So that was an easy one there to solve that one. The other one was we want to do virtual desktops because of their application requirements and some of the peripherals they were using. We had to go with virtual desktops. They couldn't really go to a shared hosted model. So
which part were you not happy about? I'm just trying to understand. You said there was something there you weren't happy about?
personal vDisk.
Oh.
So, yeah, so I was getting to that too. So we had to go the virtual desktop route because of the requirements, because of the peripheral devices needed. We couldn't do the shared hosted model. We looked at doing the static virtual machines being brokered and managing outside of the way today. They they had SCCM to manage their desktops today. They ended up saying, well, we kind of want that, the reduction on storage, the image piece, all that kind of stuff. And it's like with personal vDisk, you're not really going to get that reduction because over time it's going to keep growing and growing. It's a good it's a good technology. I'm not the biggest fan with it. If you're going to do persistent type stuff and wanted to user installed apps, just give them static virtual machines. But they ended up going with personal vDisk, and they're actually a pretty solid deployment. So
quick question. We have about 10 minutes left. Do you guys want to move on to more of an open discussion, or keep hearing some more real world feedback?
Feedback?
I'm curious. You actually said PVD and stable at the same time?
There were some challenges early on, but yeah, they're going pretty good.
We have a customer 100 seats planning.
So just keep going with the feedback.
Yeah.
You can do like one or two more.
It is possible.
Or if you have one that you want to do,
Yeah.
the other one.
How big was that one?
This was about 250, 300 users.
Okay,
So-
I think in that range.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, it wasn't like a 5,000, 1,000, it was just a little smaller one. So,
Do they let the users install apps?
yep, they'll use and start that, especially on the IT side, especially some of their power users, some of the developers. So,
Did yours too let the users install apps?
Yeah. then you're an admin to everybody else's box. And that was not what they wanted. So we came up with a script that would read what users assigned to the desktop and then on the bottom line apply that user.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Local admin rights to that desktop. So they're only a local admin on their desktop instead of being able to.
Across the board.
That's a clever improvement of that, yeah.
Maybe it should be built into the product.
Built into the
If they're assigned to this catalog, you could admin on that box only, or.
Yeah, just a thought.
Product feedback.
How'd the Unidesk stuff go?
It was pretty good. They liked it, but in the end, it was looking at cost versus, because the ending point would have been, they would have gone Zen Desktop VDI Edition plus Unidesk or Zen Desktop Enterprise. And remote PC was a big factor, and they said, okay, well, we want remote PC, got to have Zen Desktop Enterprise. So the application we did, or delivery method we did, was streamed applications. So. Here's another one. We actually did bake-off a while back with this customer. This is an old customer, where it was an early Zen Desktop customer versus View. At the time, View won the bake-off. And then, let's fast forward a couple years later, they come back to us and said, well, we're having some challenges with our current deployment. There's some features and functionality they're looking like. They want like 8 monitors. This is a financial customer. They want like 8 monitors. And so, PC over IP, it's 4 limit unless you go to RDP, and the whole story with on the View side. So now we're in the progress of doing a View and Zen Desktop backup again. Latest version of Zen Desktop, latest version of View, and we're still going through the process of that. And so far, the biggest issue has been the multi-monitors, the 8-monitor thing. So.
And that was that feature and function that I was talking about before, mapping that ahead of time. So the organization quickly saw that, hey, we need, our feature that we need is for, and function is more than 4 monitors. So that starts eliminating who can play, in that standpoint.
So here's another one. Oh, what was that?
No, I was just talking.
So here's another one. This is a customer that wasn't a customer of ours, but they had to View deployment, and they came to us, and they started saying, okay, well, we want to look at different products. We got a mobility initiative. We want to replace our load balancers. We want everything to integrate together, be a single solution. So I was like, okay, you have View today. They had issues as well with View. It was more of an undersized deployment and some other challenges they had with the View deployment. So I said, okay, let's look at your View deployment. Let's bring in the new version of Zen Desktop. They also want to look at mobility stuff as well. So the key to them was saying, well, we hear this thing from Citrix, Zen Desktop, Zen Mobile, NetScaler. We can get pretty much everything we need in those 3 products. So this new bake-off's in progress as well, because not only do they have corporate-owned devices, they have bring your own devices on the mobile side. So we want the Zen Mobile Enterprise for that to help them with that as well. The NetScaler front and everything, and so far it's going pretty good. And hopefully we'll see what happens when that one gets done, but it looks like that one's going to come over to the Zen Desktop side just because of the Citrix end-to-end solution.
Great.
So another customer we have, they have a large Citrix deployment today, but they're looking at RDS 2012 and vWorkspace. The reason is they're not actually using all the features and functions they need, on the Citrix side. They could get by with RDS 2012 if they wanted to, but they also want to look at vWorkspace.
Considering RDS 2012 with and without vWorkspace?
Yep. So one was cost is a factor because, again, they're not using all the features and functionality. If they got, sold on Platinum, they're not using Platinum. They could step down to lower edition, but they said, well, we already own Microsoft licensing. We're a big Microsoft shop, so can we get by with pure Microsoft? We don't have a lot of requirements on the different end user devices. As far as like iOS and Android and that kind of stuff.
I sort of get that, but at the same time, Citrix renewal is something like 18% of the purchase cost. It's not a huge amount of money per year if you already own it. Just I'm saying? I'm just wondering about that.
It depends on the size of the deployment.
Yeah.
So
the raw dollars.
that, and it's like, do we actually need all these bells and whistles? And look at, they're also, their system center newly deployed, they're looking at the whole Microsoft story, even though we came back and said, well, Citrix and Microsoft play very well together because this is all be Hyper-V. They still want to look at RDS 2012 in the workspace and go through the motions. That way they've done their due diligence. So that's another one in progress. It's going pretty good. Again, the vWorkspace piece will be more if they need to reach out more to iOS and Android because, RDS 2012 by itself, you can't do anything outside Microsoft with the RDS client. So.
Hosted shared or personal?
It's going to be hosted shared mostly. There's going to be some desktops in there, but it's mostly hosted shared.
So we have a minute. So let's have an open discussion for a minute. So just let's answer that one question, right? Do you feel that it's possible to do a vendor-agnostic bake-off? Kind of hearing about the framework, do you feel that it's possible? Well, hands for yes. All right, that's pretty good. All right.
Now, before we went through this whole session, did you guys think it was possible in the beginning? Yes or no?
Yes.
A couple people. Okay, good. So, and the Podio thing was pretty cool. So it looks like we got a couple hands there for that and claps. Did my clap calculation, and it looks like we're good to go to move forward with that. So, clap calculation. So, and to wrap up, basically, you can download, if you go to techbakeoff.com, there's just a little page there, and it's got a little countdown timer, and we're going to have it on Thursday. We're going to do a full release at the end of the conference. You'll be able to, so if you go on there, there's a little Podio link, just put in your name and stuff, and we'll send them over to you. And we'll put it as a download link on Thursday. So it's a 14-page, again, high-level overview of pre-bake-off, bake-off, post-bake-off. It's got sample discussion points, test cases, and kind of one-liners, as well as industry advice from some experts in the industry as well in there.